Welcome to this deep dive,
Okay.
where we're tackling a really fascinating period in China's history,
Yeah.
the 1990s and early 2000s.
Right.
We've got this amazing stack of academic articles and book excerpts from some pretty big thinkers, actually,
Oh, yeah.
like Xu Dongzhang,
Yeah,
Yang,
I know Gandhi.
Ziyuan Kui,
Yeah.
and more.
Lots more.
And we're going to try and explore how Chinese intellectuals sort of wrestled with the country's economic transformation. It's kind of like peeking behind the curtain of China's rise and understanding the ideas that shaped its path.
It's more than just the numbers and economic indicators.
Right.
We're going to delve into the clashing viewpoints, the hopes, the anxieties, a real intellectual tug of war.
Yeah.
As China tried to balance, opening its markets with its socialist ideals.
I'm really curious about that, especially the shift away from the radicalism of the Cultural Revolution towards a more, what some might call a conservative intellectual climate.
Okay.
What was driving that?
Well, think about the context.
Yeah.
China's opening up to the world brought in a wave of new ideas and influences. And economically, things were changing drastically.
Yeah.
Deng Xiaoping's famous quote, "To get rich is glorious," became a mantra for a generation.
Yeah.
Suddenly, making money was not only okay, it was encouraged.
So it wasn't just about economic policies.
No.
It was a whole shift in values.
Absolutely.
But was everyone on board with this get-rich philosophy?
Not exactly.
Okay.
This is where we see the emergence of these two camps, the liberals and the new left.
Yeah.
The liberals were all about embracing free markets and global integration. Economic growth was the priority.
Yeah.
But the new left, they were more skeptical.
Okay.
They worried about rising inequality, the erosion of socialist principles, and the potential for exploitation in a dysregulated market.
Yeah.
It was a real ideological battle.
So how did this debate play out in practical terms? What were some of the key issues they grappled with?
Property rights became a huge point of contention.
Okay.
Remember, China was transitioning away from a system where the state owned pretty much everything.
Right.
The question was, what to do with these giant state-owned enterprises, or SOEs.
These were the backbone of the Chinese economy.
Exactly.
So what were the options on the table?
Well, some argued for full-blown privatization.
Okay.
Sell them off to private investors.
Yeah.
Others favored corporatization, turning them into modern companies with clearer ownership structures.
Okay.
And then there was a push for employee ownership,
Right.
giving workers a direct stake in the companies they worked for.
Wow, that's a really diverse range of ideas.
Yeah.
It seems like there was a lot of experimentation going on.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just theoretical.
Yeah.
These debates had real consequences for the lives of millions of people.
Right.
Think about the workers in these SOEs.
Yeah.
Their livelihoods were directly affected by these decisions.
This whole debate about SOEs, it seems relevant even outside of China. It speaks to this global tension between capitalism and socialism.
Exactly. At its core, it's about what system is best equipped to deliver prosperity and fairness.
Right.
And China, in many ways, was a testing ground for these ideas. What's fascinating is that they didn't just copy Western models.
Right.
They tried to carve out their own path, a hybrid system.
Like a socialist market economy. I remember reading that term.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean? What role does the government play in all of this?
One of the thinkers we're exploring, Xiao Guangwan, argues that the state has a vital role to play, even in a market-oriented system. He says the government needs to guide development, provide public goods, and address issues like inequality, things the market alone can't solve.
So it's not just about stepping back and letting the market run wild. There's a more active role for the government envisioned here.
Precisely. It's about striking a balance between the dynamism of the market and the guiding hand of the state. This was a real departure from the neoliberal thinking that was dominant in the West at the time, which advocated for minimal government intervention.
So you have this economic transformation happening and at the same time a resurgence of national pride. How did those two trends intertwine?
That's where the concept of consumer nationalism comes in.
Okay.
It's the idea that buying Chinese-made products becomes a way to express your patriotism.
Okay.
Economic success is directly tied to national identity.
So it's not just about waving flags. It's about what you choose to buy at the store.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating way that national pride manifests itself in everyday life.
Yeah. And it's distinct from traditional models of nationalism, which were often linked to military might or anti-colonial struggles. In China, it's tied to their economic achievements and their growing presence on the global stage.
It's fascinating how those threads weave together. Speaking of looking at the past, we have Rebecca Carl's analysis of the film The Opium War.
Right.
It seems like a powerful way to understand how China grapples with its own history.
But the Opium War was a defining moment for China.
Yeah.
It marked the beginning of what some call the century of humiliation,
right.
a period of vulnerability to foreign powers. The film portrays key figures like Lin Zexu, the official who bravely tried to stop the opium trade. Emperor Daoguang, who grappled with immense pressure. And Queen Victoria, representing the strength of the British Empire at the time.
It sounds like a really complex portrayal, not shying away from the internal struggles within the Qing dynasty.
It highlights both the heroism of individuals like Lin Zexu and the systemic weaknesses of the Qing dynasty. The corruption, the inability to resist foreign influence.
So how does Carl connect this film to the resurgence of national identity in the 1990s?
She sees it as reflecting a tension between two narratives.
One
is a narrative of victimhood, emphasizing the injustice inflicted upon China. The other is a narrative of resurgence, highlighting China's determination to overcome this historical trauma and reclaim its rightful place on the global stage.
Especially with the handover of Hong Kong back to China in 1997.
Absolutely.
That must have amplified these narratives.
The film doesn't offer easy answers.
Right.
It grapples with these conflicting interpretations of China's past and what it means for their future.
It's so interesting how a historical film can speak so directly to current anxieties. Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Sure.
Peter Hitchcock examines this really intriguing phenomenon. The commodification of Mao Zedong's image after his death. It seems almost counterintuitive. How did the symbol of a communist revolution become a marketable commodity?
It really speaks to the complexities of this transition from socialism to a market economy. On the surface, it's paradoxical. But when you delve deeper, you see how Mao's image is detached from its political origins and becomes something else entirely.
Like a cultural icon, a brand almost. I've seen those images. Mao on T-shirts, lighters, even in pop art.
It's fascinating how meaning shifts over time.
It is.
He's a nostalgic figure. A symbol of a bygone era. And for a fashion statement, it shows how China is grappling with its past, reinterpreting it, and in a way commodifying it.
So you have this macro level transformation happening. But then it's also playing out in the everyday lives of people. The Miao people's experience with consumerism, as described in these sources, really highlights that.
The Miao, an ethnic minority largely in southwestern China, have historically been marginalized. Suddenly, they're bombarded with images of a new lifestyle, a world of consumer goods they had limited access to before. It creates this yearning for a better life, a desire to be part of this modern, prosperous China.
That's what they call cargo desire, right?
Exactly.
It reminds me of those cargo cults in the Pacific Islands, where people believed Western goods could be magically obtained.
It speaks to the power of images and aspirations. It's not just about material possessions. It's about social mobility, wanting to bridge the gap between their traditional way of life and this new modern world they're being exposed to.
And it's not just limited to the Miao people.
No.
I imagine that cargo desire resonated with many who felt left behind by the economic boom.
You're right. It brings up this crucial point about the unevenness of China's development. There were clear winners and losers in this transition.
And visually, nothing captures that transformation more than the shift in fashion. From the uniformity of Mao suits to this explosion of individual style and cosmopolitan aspirations.
It's a dramatic shift.
Well, it's like looking at two different worlds.
We go from conformity being the norm to individual expression being valued. People using clothes accessories, even their leisure activities, to communicate who they are, their aspirations, and their connection to the world.
It seems like this idea of imagined cosmopolitanism is at play here. Can you explain what that means?
Imagine constructing your identity and aspirations in relation to global trends and images, even if you haven't actually experienced life outside of China. It's about creating this sense of belonging to a globalized world.
So you're drawing inspiration from global fashion brands, lifestyles, even if your world is still very local.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And media and advertising play a huge role in fueling this.
Yeah.
It's a way of signaling modernity.
Right.
Sophistication being part of something bigger.
Right.
It's also a way to distance yourself from the past, from that era of uniformity and revolutionary austerity.
It's like saying, we're part of the modern world, we're connected, we're moving forward.
Yeah.
But with all this rapid change happening, I'm curious about the role of intellectuals. Yeah. How are they navigating this new landscape?
It's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah.
Our sources reveal a real tension between intellectuals, popular culture, and the state.
It sounds like there are a lot of competing forces at play.
There are.
Can you break that down a bit more?
You have intellectuals critical of the government, worried about inequality, corruption, the erosion of socialist values. Then you have those embracing the market, celebrating China's rise, seeing globalization as a positive force. And then you have this booming popular culture, often driven by commercial interests, and the state trying to maintain control while also adapting to this new reality.
Wow. It's a complicated web.
It is.
It's hard to even know who's influencing whom in this mix.
It's a dynamic interplay, and it's constantly evolving. But it's important to remember, there's no singular Chinese perspective. There are a multitude of voices, viewpoints, and interpretations.
And it's probably changing all the time as China continues to transform. These sources are like snapshots of this specific moment in time. This period of intellectual ferment.
Exactly. But these ideas and debates are still relevant today as China grapples with being a global superpower, a market economy, and a society undergoing immense change.
So this brings up a really important question. What space is there for critical political engagement in this new context? Is there room for dissent? For alternative voices in a China that's becoming increasingly confident and assertive?
That is the big question. And it's one that many of these intellectuals were wrestling with. Xu Dongzhang, for example, talks about the emergence of a proto-public sphere.
That sounds interesting. What exactly does he mean by that?
He describes it as a space where ideas can be debated, where dissent can be voiced, where alternative perspectives can surface. It's not a fully formed public sphere in the Western sense. But it suggests that Chinese society is becoming more pluralistic. More open to different viewpoints.
So there's a glimmer of bottom-up energy pushing against top-down control.
Exactly. It's being shaped by several factors. The rise of the market economy, the decentralization of state power, the growth of the internet and social media, and the influence of global ideas.
So you have this confluence of forces that are creating the conditions for a more open and critical dialogue. That's promising. But I imagine it's a delicate balance.
Absolutely. It's a fragile space, constantly being negotiated. The government is still wary of dissent. And there are limits to what can be said and done. But despite those constraints, there are signs of a nascent civil society emerging. One that's more assertive, more willing to engage in debate, and more connected to global trends.
It's a mixed picture then. A combination of hopeful signs and ongoing challenges.
I think that's a fair assessment. China's in transition. And the intellectual landscape is as dynamic as its economic and social landscape. It's a fascinating time to be studying China. And these sources provide a valuable window into the ideas that are shaping the country's future.
One thing that struck me as particularly interesting in these sources is the emphasis on everydayness. It's not just about grand theories, but how ordinary people are experiencing these transformations. How they're making sense of their lives, how they're expressing themselves.
It's a vital perspective. It's so easy to view China through a purely political or economic lens. But this focus on everyday life reminds us that China is a society of over 1 billion people. Each with their own unique stories, aspirations, and experiences.
It's easy to get caught up in the grand narrative of China's rise. The economic miracle, the technology, the geopolitical maneuvering. But these individual stories, those get lost in the headlines.
Exactly. And these sources help bring those stories to life.
Right.
We hear about the Miao woman yearning for fashionable clothes.
Yeah.
the migrant worker trying to navigate city life, the intellectual struggling to reconcile tradition with modernity.
These stories bring texture and nuance to our understanding of China.
Yes.
They remind us that behind the statistics, there are real people whose lives are being shaped by these forces.
It challenges us to move beyond simplistic generalizations.
Yeah.
And engage with the real complexities of Chinese society.
That's such a crucial point. It's easy to fall into the trap of essentializing China,
right,
of reducing it to a single narrative or a monolithic entity. It's a vast and diverse country, and these sources really underscore that.
It's reflected in the intellectual landscape as well. There's no single Chinese school of thought.
Right.
You have liberals, conservatives, Marxists, nationalists, postmodernists, and everything in between.
It's like a kaleidoscope of ideas all interacting and influencing each other.
Exactly. It's a dynamic and evolving process.
Right.
And these sources give us a glimpse into that.
Now, as we dig deeper into these sources, one recurring theme that jumps out is this notion of unevenness.
It's the recognition that China's development hasn't benefited everyone equally.
Right.
There are winners and losers, those who have prospered and those who have been left behind.
You see this in the growing gap between rich and poor.
Yeah.
The disparities between urban and rural areas.
Right.
And the challenges faced by ethnic minorities like the Miao. Economic growth doesn't automatically equal social progress.
And this unevenness is also mirrored in the intellectual landscape.
Okay.
Some intellectuals have embraced the market economy and globalization.
Right.
While others have been more critical,
yeah,
pointing to the negative consequences.
So there's this ongoing debate about the direction China is heading in, about the values that should guide its development.
Exactly.
And a lot of that is framed in terms of a tension between liberalism and the new left.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, as Judong Zhang explains, liberals tend to emphasize individual freedom.
Okay.
Market principles and China's integration into the global economy.
Right.
They see economic growth as the key to progress and often criticize the government's authoritarian tendencies.
And the new left.
The new left is a bit more diverse, but they generally share concerns about inequality, social justice, the erosion of socialist values.
Yeah.
They critique what they see as unbridled capitalism and call for a more equitable distribution of wealth and opportunity.
It sounds like a fundamental clash of visions for what kind of society China should be.
Exactly. And this tension runs through so many of our sources. It's a debate that continues today, reflecting the deep uncertainties and anxieties that come with such rapid transformation.
It's a reminder that China's journey in the 21st century is bound to be complex, full of twists, turns, and unexpected outcomes.
Yeah.
And the ideas we've explored today help us grasp the forces at play.
We've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But I think this deep dive gives us a good sense of the intellectual and economic currents shaping China in the 1990s and early 2000s.
And these currents continue to shape China today.
Right.
The challenges of globalization, inequality, nationalism, political reform, they're as relevant now as they were then.
It makes you realize that studying China isn't just about the big picture. It's about understanding the lives of real people grappling with these changes. And speaking of individual experiences, Michael Dutton's work on what he calls street scenes of subalternity really brings this point home.
Dutton focuses on those who are often invisible in the grand narrative of China's rise. He looks at the lives of migrant workers, the urban poor street vendors, those who are eking out a living in the shadows of the gleaming skyscrapers.
He uses this term liu, which I understand refers to this kind of floating population, people constantly on the move without secure housing or stable jobs.
Yes, and he argues that these people challenge the official narrative of progress. They're a stark reminder that economic growth doesn't always trickle down, that the shift to a market economy has created new forms of vulnerability.
It's a perspective we don't often hear. We get caught up in the economic miracle, but Dutton forces us to confront the human cost of these rapid changes.
He links it to the broader conversation about human rights. He argues that the focus on political dissidents often overshadows the struggles of those facing economic and social marginalization.
It's a really important point. We tend to have a very specific lens when we look at China from the outside.
Dutton's work brings that human cost into sharp focus. It compels us to grapple with the ethical implications of China's development model.
And he ties this to globalization as well, right? It's not just about the flow of goods and money, but also ideas, culture, and people.
Exactly. And these flows create new tensions, new identities, new layers of social and economic stratification. Dutton helps us understand how globalization is playing out in the daily lives of ordinary people.
It circles back to that idea of cargo desire we talked about earlier. These individuals Dutton describes are often drawn to consumer goods, yet their ability to participate in that consumerist lifestyle is restricted by their circumstances.
It's that tension between aspiration and reality. It's a tension that's becoming increasingly prevalent in a globalized world.
As we wrap up our deep dive, I want to touch upon something that's been woven throughout our discussion, the role of intellectuals in this era of rapid change. What stands out to you as their biggest challenge?
One of the biggest, I believe, is finding the space to speak truth to power in a society that's still navigating its relationship with dissent. It can be difficult to express views that challenge the official line.
And then there's the challenge of staying relevant in a society that's increasingly captivated by market forces and consumer culture.
It can be isolating. Intellectuals can find themselves marginalize their ideas and values seemingly out of sync with the prevailing trends.
But at the same time, I sense a real hunger for critical thinking and fresh perspectives. People are looking for ways to make sense of the rapid changes happening around them, and they're open to new ideas.
I agree, and that proto-public sphere we discussed earlier offers a glimmer of hope. It suggests a growing space for debate, dissent, and diverse viewpoints.
The internet and social media have also played a huge role in fostering these spaces. They connect people, allow information to flow more freely, and offer new avenues for self-expression.
There's a palpable sense of dynamism in China's intellectual landscape. It's a time of both immense challenge and extraordinary opportunity. It will be fascinating to see how things unfold in the years ahead.
So as we conclude our deep dive, is there any single takeaway you'd want our listener to walk away with?
I think the most crucial takeaway is this: China is a complex and multifaceted society. It defies easy categorization or simplistic generalizations. We see this in the range of intellectual perspectives, the unevenness of economic development, and the ongoing challenges of social and political reform.
That very complexity is what makes China such a captivating subject. It's a country constantly evolving, constantly challenging our assumptions, constantly surprising us with its dynamism and its contradictions.
It's essential to approach China with humility, recognizing that we may never fully grasp its intricacies or predict its future, but by engaging with the ideas and experiences of both intellectuals and everyday people, we can gain a much deeper understanding of this pivotal nation and its impact on the world.
So there you have it, your deep dive into China's intellectual and economic currents during this pivotal period. I hope it's given you a taste of the richness and vibrancy of Chinese thought.
I hope it sparked a curiosity to learn more. We've only just begun to explore the vast universe of knowledge and insights that await.
Keep those China brains buzzing, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Book of Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our growing community. Click the bell icon so you never miss an update. We have so much more inspiring content coming your way.